welcome to the Design Portal BootCamp lesson on dynamically creating statistics. In the previous lesson, we learned how to create statistic rules on the Design Portal, but you can skip this step and create statistics dynamically in your app via the increment and process statistics API calls. This behavior is of course disabled by default. I'll show you how to enable it in just a moment. To start this lesson, we already have an authenticated session in the API Explorer. From the service drop-down list, select Global Game Statistics. From the operation drop-down list, click Increment Global Stats. Watch what happens if we try and increment a statistic that hasn't been created yet. The response contains an error. That's because the player count statistic hasn't been created yet. If the Generate App Statistic Rule Enabled setting was enabled, this request would have succeeded and it would have dynamically created the setting. Let's enable that setting now. On the left, click Core App Info, then Advanced Settings. On this screen, there are two toggles called Generate User Statistic Rule Enabled and Generate App Statistic Rule Enabled. When enabled, you can generate statistics dynamically from the app without having to first manually create the statistic on the Design Portal. If you wish to only create statistics manually via the Design Portal, then leave these two toggles disabled. On the left, click Cloud Code, then API Explorer. Let's rerun the same request that failed a moment ago. Notice in the response that we didn't get an error, and in fact the player count statistic was returned with a value of 1. Let's confirm this by reading all the stats. From the operation drop-down list, click Read All Global Stats. Click Execute to make the request. Notice that the response contains 4 statistics, the 3 that we created on the Design Portal in the previous lesson, and player count, the statistic that we dynamically created a moment ago. On the left, click Cloud Data, then Global Statistics. Notice the player count statistic. It has a category called Generated. Clicking the statistic, the side pane will pop out and we can edit any of the statistic rules. We're going to leave them as is, but it's good to know that you can edit the statistic after the fact. On the left, click Cloud Code, then API Explorer. From the service drop-down list, click Player Statistics. From the operation drop-down list, click Read All User Stats. Click Execute to run the request. In the response, notice that the 3 statistics that we created in the previous lesson are returned. From the operation drop-down list, select Increment User Stats. In the Parameters section, enter a new statistic to create. Click Execute to run the request. In the response, we can see that the Matches 1 statistic was created. From the Operations drop-down list, select Read All User Stats. Click Execute to run the request. In the response, notice that it now contains 4 statistics, the 3 statistics that we created on the Design Portal in the previous lesson, and player count, the statistic we just created dynamically a moment ago. On the left, click Cloud Data, then User Statistics. Notice the Matches 1 statistic. It has a category called Generated. Clicking the statistic, the side pane will pop out and we can edit any of the statistics rules. Again, we're not going to make any changes, so we're going to leave it as is. On the left, click Users, then User Browser. Click the top user in the list. Then on the right, click Go to User. Then on the left, click Data, then Statistics. Expectedly, the Matches 1 statistic is listed here and has a value of 1. Global Properties is the next lesson in the Design Portal Bootcamp.